Hey, so a couple days ago, a huge new policy came out from Washington, D.C., and what we wanted to do is kind of jump into it and dissect it. So, as usual, if we want to go here, then there's a lot of steps that we have to take between now and then. And we created this set of playlists to tell our story as we're going. This one really falls into the category of space news, especially commercialization, Space Force, and a little bit of pop culture. So when we talk about the 4 pillars, it falls right squarely into number 4, framework. And so what is this thing? What is this thing? Why does it matter? Let's first start with, it's a policy out of the National Space Council. And the National Space Council is an organization that's been alive and dead and alive and dead at different times in different administrations. Most famously, it's the organization that spoke to Kennedy about his focus on going to the moon before the decade is out. And so the Trump administration reconstituted it, and it is led by a pretty amazing guy, Dr. Scott Pace. And what it's done is said, we need really a whole of government approach to going to space. It's not just about NASA these days. And so this document's got a lot of weight, and we're going to talk about the details, but here's the title, A New Era for Deep Space Exploration and Development. The link is in the description. It's really worth reading. So it covers these 5 areas, and we're going to go into more specifics as we explore this document. So this stuff is coming up soon. What it's trying to do is look at current programs and potential near-term future programs and the role of government to instigate these policies. So what is this thing? Well, first of all, it's the focus of going beyond low Earth orbit. Most of our activity as humans has really centered it between geosynchronous orbit, MEO, middle Earth orbit, and LEO. And we're about to have a very congested environment at LEO. We've gotten really good at low Earth orbit. We're about to have tens of thousands. We currently have roughly 3,000, and we're going to have soon 10 to 90,000 satellites at low Earth orbit. So we're pretty good at that. And so this document is saying, all right, fine, we're good at low Earth orbit. What do we do now? And so this policy is talking about what we do beyond low Earth orbit and why. And the focus is long-term exploration and utilization. This isn't just about the moon. It's also not just about Mars. It's everything beyond LEO. So that's the whole solar system. It's amazing to me. One of the reasons I really wanted to highlight this document to y'all is the first page. The first paragraph, the second sentence includes low Earth orbit commercialization. That the idea of commercialization is threaded throughout this whole document, and it's in the opening paragraph. So that should kind of give you an idea like where we're going here, is that this document really highlights the capabilities of the commercial space sector. So that's a really important detail, and it's highlighted many times throughout this document. What are we going to do? So this vision is to utilize and develop, so those 2 keywords are going to come up over and over again, utilize and develop core technologies, core capabilities. And again, focuses on the commercial space economy. So they're already starting to differentiate that There was a space program before today, and there's going to be a space program after today, and the divider really comes down to utilization, development, and the commercial sector. We talk about the areas that this document focuses on, right? The economy, national security, science, and diplomacy. Diplomacy is an often overlooked but very important component to our US space program. We used diplomacy to build a better relationship with the Soviets long before the wall came down, and we've used diplomacy, we've used the space program to push diplomatic agendas with the International Space Station as well. But it's this next section that I really want to hone in on. When it says that the landscape has changed and the nature of leadership in space has evolved, that is vitally important to understand. It used to always be about firsts. Russia's Sputnik was the first satellite, and Gagarin was the first orbital astronaut. We were the first on the moon. There's always these firsts. There's a lot of firsts. The first animal, the first orbital, the first space station. Lots of firsts. Everybody's claiming firsts. What this document is saying is that the nature of leadership in space has evolved. It's less about firsts and more about expansion, capabilities, being able to reach further and farther. Of course, the first woman on the moon, that's a big deal. Credit where it's due, the recent Chinese rover on the far side of the moon, that's a big deal. So people are still going to claim firsts. That's not going to change. Absolutely, the first person on Mars is going to be a big deal. But what they're saying here is, quite boldly, the nature of leadership in space has evolved, and we're going to see that in the rest of this document. So what are we trying to do? Well, first of all, there's challenges and how we work those challenges. And remember, we've talked about hardware, business, outreach, and framework. Those are our definitions, LiftPort's definitions of challenges, but certainly those can be applied across the board to national space policy. So how are we going to provide opportunities to our partner nations, to our partner commercial space organizations, to our partner academic organizations? So that's still very fuzzy. I believe that's really a work in progress. But this acknowledges that there are new departments that typically, traditionally, have not had a role in space that now have a role in space. This document gives other agencies, other organizations, political cover for their role in space. For example, this document came out on the 23rd of July, and on the 24th, the very next day, the Department of Energy issued a challenge to create a nuclear power plant that would be capable of the moon and Mars. So up until now, they didn't have a role. Now they have a role. It's that kind of almost immediacy that this document is going to have ripple effects. So by giving other departments and other agencies political cover, they can get more involved with the space program. And I think that that's really important because they didn't have that mandate before. Let's face it, this is a very wonky space policy document. It's 23 pages. It's hard to read, honestly. there are not very many people in the country that are going to read this thing. It was a conversation internally with the team about whether or not we should highlight it. But the people that do read it will have influence on the future. And it's a safe sentence to say there aren't that many Americans who are going to be really compelled to read this document, but I assure you, folks in Russia and China are going to be looking at this document very, very carefully. So I find this particular, phrase in here, dissuading adversaries, to be interesting because it effectively puts near-peer nations on notice that this is what we're doing. And of course, I believe they probably already know that, but this document codifies that sentiment. There's a lot in this slide. We talk about industrial scale commercial activities. I've been in this field for nearly 20 years, and I don't think I've ever seen an official policy document that used the phrase industrial scale commercial activities. When I started, that would have been a phrase straight out of Star Trek. That would have been so far distantly in the future as to be an unbelievable statement. And for it to be in this document, that's pretty surprising. I would go so far as to say that's a pretty bold choice of language. Certainly that's exciting for us. That's important to us at LiftPort, but it's also important to the global space community. There will be organizations out there that build, if we're using Star Trek as a reference, there will be organizations that build the Enterprise. And I think that's amazing. There's going to be on-orbit transportation. There's going to be on-orbit construction. They're going to source materials from somewhere not on Earth, whether that's asteroids or the moon, or recycling space debris. There's going to be an industrial scale of commercial activities. And this document points that out and says, if that's true, then what? So then we start talking about, American companies effectively competing in the global marketplace. Well, that's a pretty lovely phrase. I would like to see how they build regulations that enable that. We'll see how that unfolds. But then there's this line in here about a foundational requirement of space leadership is the US commercial space sector. And I was at a meeting last summer. I was at a meeting last summer where the chief scientist then of Air Force Space Command, now the chief scientist of Space Force, said that that the key to the future for American space program is the commercial space sector. So it is really gratifying to see something that was openly ridiculed 10, 12, 15 years ago really kind of coming into its own and being accepted by federal leadership. Speaking of US Space Force, I think this line is pretty important. It's saying that they don't necessarily have a role directly in the development of space, but they have a lot of indirect follow-on elements, right? Space transportation and logistics, sure. Power communications, obviously pretty important. Navigation, we already know that the American way of life kind of depends on GPS. So I believe, and this is me reading into this document, I believe this says that they're going to have a developmental role. But fingers crossed. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's my hope. This piece, though, about the role that the Space Force could potentially hold as enforcing responsible behavior in space, I think that one's really significant. And then the tying in of the State Department, Defense Department, Secretary of Commerce, Transportation, Energy and Homeland Security, showing that each of these organizations have a significant role in the development of this new strategy. I think that's really important, and I really don't believe I've ever heard whole of government approach in space this consistently. I've seen it before, but not at this level. So my enthusiasm for this is higher because I believe it's we've kind of raised the notch a little bit. It's funny how they talk about going to the moon with a public-private partnership as a symbolic first step. Certainly I believe that. I know that there are a lot of folks rooting for Mars, and my heart's with you. I want to get there as badly as you do. But you know, a symbolic first step, I really like the language of that, and I think it's true. So leveraging public-private partnerships, I mean, that is the reason we restarted this company. It's the reason a lot of space companies out there are building, because very few, if any, companies can just go to space by themselves. Not even ultra-funded Blue Origin or ultra-funded SpaceX could go to space without having the government either as a partner or a client. So this public-private partnerships philosophy, that underlying philosophy, has enabled us to restart our company, but it also has enabled dozens, if not hundreds, of private small companies to dream about going to space with NASA as either an anchor tenant or as a lighthouse customer. So I really like the language of this, and I think that this will help unfold a very specific future that I'm looking forward to. So that's the introduction of this document, the New Era document. Over the next few days, we're going to go even deeper into some of the other core elements, and I'm sure there are questions. If there are, please post them to the channel. I'll do my best to answer them. I confess I'm not a space policy expert, although I do have a fair amount of experience in this arena. So thanks for your interest. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Okay.